This week, the Kansas legislature returned to the session after what we call turnaround took place last week. Of course, in last broadcast, I mentioned that turnaround is basically where bills that originate in the House are then sent over to the Senate, and likewise, Senate bills that originate over there will come to the House. We didn't see a lot of activity acting on those bills, but probably next week we'll see those Senate bills taken up in the House, and we'll have more to report on that. Now, as I mentioned last week, when we went into turnaround, those last 3 days were quite busy in the House chamber. We went through about 50 bills in about 2.5 days. Just touch on a couple of those. Before that, one thing I'd mention is last week that we did hear from the expert witness that the Republican leadership had hired to review or at least respond on behalf of the state with regard to the Gannon versus State of Kansas lawsuit. The expert witness that was brought in was from Texas A&M University. Her name was Dr. Lori Taylor. I sat through that presentation, and I did not really learn a lot because there really wasn't a lot of specifics offered in regard. And members of the education committees, both House and Senate, questioned her methodology as far as how she was going to arrive at any kind of a recommendation on what kind of increased funding we would need for education. Now, her performance that she did in Texas regarding their school finance review was less than stellar in my opinion. In fact, there was quite a bit of criticism and also not very well reviewed by several of the judges down there as far as her recommendations to the state of Texas. So her final report will be due to the state of Kansas on March 15th, and obviously that'll be one of the things we'll highlight in our report and talk to you a little bit about that. Some of the bills that passed, during that turnaround week, House Bill 2539, this bill I had mentioned amends the qualifications for anyone running for governor, secretary of state, state treasurer, attorney general. They'd have to be a qualified elector, meaning they'd have to be old enough to vote. That's obviously in response to a number of young people running for governor here in the state of Kansas. Also passing was House Bill 2530. We have several entities that are required to report any signs of abuse or neglect, especially of children. And of course, those consist of doctors, nurses, emergency room, personnel. Added to that list, though, is EMS attendants. So they would be required by law under this statutory language to report any suspected abuse and so forth. Just another step, I believe, to try to protect our young people out there that may find themselves in less than desirable conditions. Also passed last week was House Bill 2701. This bill would establish a statewide broadband expansion task force. It's been a big issue this session, some of our underserved areas, especially in the rural areas. And I've sat in on several meetings and presentations on broadband expansion. Obviously, they always talk about the last mile being the most expensive. So some of the rural areas are going to have to spend a considerable amount of money and maybe only have a handful of customers. They're trying to figure out how to best do this and make it cost effective, and subsequently we find ourselves still kind of in that search for that answer. I'll have more on that, I think, as the session goes on. Obviously, a big focus here in the legislature is our revenues, and we have seen increased revenues ever since last August. They've increased each month over the estimates. And obviously this is important as we look at how to solve our school funding issue here as far as additional monies. I might point out that the just ended month of February saw revenue increases of $24 million over the estimates. And also I might point out sales tax receipts were also up at $175.6 million. And this is over the estimate of $168 million. So that's about a 7.5% increase. That's good news to see that increase. And so basically what we're looking at here in our state is that we are $609.4 million or 16.88% above last year, fiscal year at this time. So the action taken by the legislature last year is really showing up as far as increasing our revenues. And so we'll be keeping an eye on that. And also that makes, I think, our task of getting a school finance formula for the Supreme Court ready a lot easier. So I'll have more next week.